Hello, namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. It was a day of drama, diplomacy and doubt. After 6 years, the presidents of the United States and China came face to face, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. They finally met in South Korea. The world was watching. They were hoping for a big breakthrough. But what unfolded was mostly a show. The summit lasted an hour and 40 minutes. At the end of it, no deals were signed. Instead, the two sides have a handshake agreement. A tactical pause, a ceasefire of sorts. We'll bring you the highlights. We'll also tell you how Trump could launch a new nuclear arms race. The US will resume the testing of nukes. Also in focus, how big tech is powering the AI economy by cycling money among themselves. Why India withdrew from a military base in Tajikistan. Why did they have it in the first place? All about America's latest crackdown on work visas. What is India's plan to become a maritime superpower? How the US tried to bribe Maduro's pilot to abduct the Venezuelan president, and why the Indian diet may be driving diabetes and obesity. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. A diplomatic win for India. It gets a 6-month US sanctions waiver for the Chabahar port in Iran. This comes amid trade negotiations between the two countries. During Donald Trump's first term, he had granted India exemption to keep developing Chabahar, but recently Washington slapped sanctions on the project to punish Iran over its nuclear program. Nepal's interim leader holds talks with political parties and youth leaders. It was the first such meeting since last month's deadly anti-corruption protests. More than 70 people were killed in the unrest, which toppled the previous government. Nepal will hold general elections in March next year. Tanzania under a communications blackout a day after elections turned into violent chaos. Many are feared dead. Schools and colleges have been closed. The polls were virtually uncontested as the president looks to solidify her position. The German economy narrowly dodges a recession after stagnating in the third quarter. Europe's top economy posted zero growth from July to September. Weakening exports have hit the country hard amid Donald Trump's tariff onslaught. And an Italian court rules against the construction of a new bridge to Sicily. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has condemned the court's decision. In August, her government had approved the multi-billion-dollar project. If completed, it will be the world's longest suspension bridge connecting Sicily to the mainland.
We're going to have a very successful meeting, I have no doubt. But he's a very tough negotiator. That's not good. We've already agreed to a lot of things.
For the two leading economies of the world to have frictions now and then.
It has finally happened. The Trump-Xi Jinping summit. The presidents of the US and China met this morning in South Korea. The meeting lasted an hour and 40 minutes. It was their first meeting in 6 years. Of course, the world was watching. The cameras, the handshakes, the expectation, the whole shebang. There was hope that the two leaders would make progress on trade, tech and military tensions. Instead, the summit turned into a show. Plenty of optics, but few outcomes. The China-US relationship remains as strained as ever. That was clear from the moment the two leaders met.
And we're going to have a very successful meeting, I have no doubt. But he's a very tough negotiator. That's not good. We know each other well.
Mr. President, do you plan to sign a trade deal today?
Could be. I think we'll have a great understanding. We have a great relationship. We've always had a great relationship.
This was before the talks began. Trump had a lot to say to the press. Even before he sat down with the Chinese leader, he declared that they will have a successful meeting and that the US and China have a great relationship. Chinese President Xi Jinping did not respond to any of that, but the outcomes speak for themselves. The US and China have failed to strike a deal. What they've agreed upon is this: a one-year tactical pause. In other words, it's a precarious ceasefire, not an end to the war. Let's look at the key outcomes, and we'll start with trade, of course. For 1 year, Trump will reduce tariffs on Chinese goods. That's what he's agreed to. Reducing tariffs on Chinese goods for 1 year. In return, China will start buying American soybean again. The current tariff rate is 57%. The US is cutting it by a modest 10%, so the new rate will be 47%. Chinese exports to the United States will be taxed at 47%. As a gesture of goodwill, China placed an order for American soybeans just before the two leaders met. They bought 3 cargoes from the United States, and this was, like I said, just before the meeting between Xi and Trump. Remember, China is the biggest buyer of this American crop, but as trade tensions soared, China stopped buying. This was in the month of May. That's when they stopped. It was China's tit-for-tat response to Trump's tariffs. They stopped buying from the US and began importing from Brazil instead. This hurt American farmers. They are a key political constituency for President Trump. So now that China has resumed importing, the US farmers would be happy. That's the update on the trade front. No sweeping tariff cut. China gets a 10% relief for 1 year, and they start buying American soybean. That's trade. Then we come to rare earths. Again, no major breakthrough, though China did make a concession. It is pausing export controls for 1 year. As you know, China supplies rare earths to the US. But in the past few months, it has introduced sweeping curbs, both on mineral exports and on the extraction technology. China refuses to share any of it. The first restrictions were announced in April this year. They are still in place. The second set of restrictions were announced this month. Those have been relaxed. So Beijing is being selective in easing pressure. But Trump is selling it as a big win. He says all roadblocks are gone.
I mean, worldwide. This, I guess you could really say this was a worldwide situation, not just the U.S. situation. So we continue to produce the rare earths and buy the rare earths and everything else, when you see from other countries. But China is, that whole situation, that roadblock is gone now. There's no roadblock at all.
Trump called it a win for both the US and the world, even though the matter is far from settled. China can easily turn up the pressure again. Next item on the agenda is the supply of semiconductors or chips. The leaders discussed that too. Again, no specifics. Will China buy chips from US companies like NVIDIA? Will Trump lift restrictions on such purchases? There is no clarity. And from the looks of it, no breakthrough.
NVIDIA is the leader, and I'll be speaking to Jensen from NVIDIA, but they're going to be discussing that with NVIDIA to see whether or not they can do. I said that's really between you and NVIDIA, but we're sort of the arbitrator or the referee. It's a little rough up here. The skies are a little rough.
Then we come to the conflicts. Trump says Taiwan did not come up in the conversation. The Chinese statement does not mention it either. On Ukraine, Trump said, and I quote, "The war came up very strongly." Those were his words. The war came up very strongly, and Xi Jinping agreed to work together. That's what Trump has claimed. But he did not say how or when. China, too, did not share any specifics. Same with TikTok. China said it will work with the US to, quote-unquote, properly address it. But is there a deal in place on TikTok? China did not confirm that. So to sum it up, the US and China do not have an agreement. No document, no signature, no legally binding pacts, just pictures, handshakes, and understanding, and the promise to keep talking. Look at the Chinese statement after the meeting. The tone is cautious. No victory laps or bold headlines. They reported that President Xi called for more dialogue. In fact, he left the meeting venue without saying anything to Trump. Trump's version was very different though. In his trademark style, he was quick to call it a win. He announced that he will be traveling to China soon and that the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, will pay a return visit.
Hello, everybody. Mr. President. I thought it was an amazing meeting. He's a great leader of a very powerful, very strong country, China. And what can I say? We have, it was an outstanding group of decisions, I think, that was made. A lot of decisions were made, too. There wasn't too much left out there. I'll be going to China in April, and he'll be coming here sometime after that, whether it's in Florida, Palm Beach, or Washington, D.C.
So what did this summit really achieve? A fragile truce, a pause, not a reset. The big issues like trade and tech are still on the table, and the deals are on shaky ground. Trump likes to call himself the president of peace, but in South Korea, he's only bought time with China. The peace is far away. Our world has 1,000 problems, but I'll tell you what is not one of them. Lack of nuclear warheads. If anything, there are too many bombs and too much rhetoric. But tell that to Donald Trump. He has made a stunning announcement. Trump has ordered the US military to resume nuclear testing. And listen to his justification. Because of other countries' testing programs, I have instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis. That process will begin immediately. Trump says others are testing, so we will test too. And this is a huge announcement. The last time the US tested a nuclear bomb was way back in 1992. So Trump is reviving something that's been dead for 33 years. And his decision came out of nowhere. He announced it just minutes before meeting Xi Jinping. Naturally, there are questions. What exactly is a nuclear test? Why did countries stop doing it? And why is Trump resuming it? Nuclear tests are controlled explosions. You basically detonate a nuclear bomb intentionally. The idea is to gauge its power and capabilities. That is the military rationale for testing. Politically, it's also a message to your rivals, sort of like a warning to stay away. Since 1945, more than 2,000 such tests have been conducted, but in the 1990s, it slowed down. Russia detonated its last nuclear device in 1990. The US did it, like I said, in 1992 and China in 1996. What explains the decline? Well, the Cold War ended in 1991, so the US and Russia had no more reasons to test. In fact, only one country has tested a nuclear bomb in the 21st century, and that country is North Korea. Their last nuclear test was in 2017. So both China and Russia have slammed Trump's decision.
China hopes that the U.S. will earnestly abide by and respect its obligations under the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty and its commitment to suspend nuclear testing and take concrete actions to safeguard the international nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation system and maintain global strategic balance and stability.
So just to recap, Russia and China have not tested a nuclear bomb in 30 years. Then why is Trump doing it? Because the nuclear rhetoric is rising. China's nuclear arsenal has doubled in the last 5 years. from 300 warheads in 2020 to 600 in 2025. So Beijing is boosting its stockpile. Meanwhile, Russia is testing new weapons. Last week, they launched the Burevestnik missile. It's both nuclear-powered and nuclear-capable, meaning it can stay in the air for much longer. Russia claims the Burevestnik can beat any air defense shield. So days later, Donald Trump resumes nuclear testing. But is this the right solution? According to military experts, no. Russia may have tested a nuclear-capable missile, but they did not explode a nuclear bomb. What Trump is doing has no political or military rationale. Some experts called it misguided, not to mention time-consuming. You can't just wake up one day and test nuclear bombs. It takes months of preparation. At least 36 months before a test can be organized. And this is classic Trump. Less logic, more sensation. Just think about it. The theory of nuclear deterrence is well established. Nobody in their right mind is lobbing nukes at the US. Nobody is firing nukes at the United States. Yes, they are building new missiles, but the answer to that is not testing a nuclear weapon, a nuclear bomb. It is to sharpen your own technology. In fact, Trump is already doing it. He unveiled a massive air defense project called the Golden Dome. It's expected to cost around $175 billion. And what does it do? It defends the United States from all sorts of missiles, even hypersonic ones, according to Trump. Some experts say even the Golden Dome is extra, but sure, let's give it to him. Nuclear testing is a red line. A global treaty banned such tests in 1996. It's called the CTBT, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. More than 180 countries have signed this agreement. They have agreed to never test a nuke. But a few nuclear powers are yet to ratify it, like the US, Russia, India, Pakistan, and China. If Trump opens the Pandora's box, nobody knows what will happen. If common sense prevails in Beijing and Moscow, they will show restraint. If not, they could follow suit, thus unleashing a new nuclear race. For our next story, let's start with a simple image. Imagine 6 people sitting at a round table. Each has a suitcase stuffed with cash. Every few minutes, they slide their case to the person on the right. Then they call it new capital infusion. Remember, no new money has entered the room. Nothing new has been created. It's the same cash, just changing hands again and again. It sounds absurd, right? Well, that's what the new AI economy looks like. Tech giants are increasingly investing in each other, only to build products for each other and sell them to each other. It's like Silicon Valley invented the world's most expensive carousel. Take NVIDIA, for example. Yesterday, it became a $5 trillion company, $5 trillion. To put that in context, NVIDIA was worth $144 billion in 2020. In 2025, it's worth $5 trillion. That is a gigantic surge. And the reason is the AI boom. NVIDIA is doubling down on it. Look at the deals they've signed. One of them is with Palantir. Palantir is a well-known US defense contractor. It will use NVIDIA's chips and software that will help its customers speed up logistics. But do you know who else Palantir has a deal with? Microsoft. Palantir partnered with Microsoft in 2024. This was to sell AI services to the US government. So these two have a deal too. And all of this has made Palantir shares explode. They've surged by 550% in the last year, 550%. That makes it one of the top performing stocks on the S&P 500. That's the list of the 500 biggest publicly traded US companies. Palantir is one of the most valued stocks. Which brings us to Microsoft, because do you know what else they're doing? They're trying a new partnership with OpenAI, the same company that created ChatGPT. OpenAI is restructuring as a public benefit corporation. It used to be a non-profit, but now it's becoming a for-profit organization. Microsoft is taking a 27% stake in this. Currently, OpenAI is valued at $500 billion, so Microsoft's stake will be worth $135 billion. And if all of this is already making your head spin, let me tell you there is more. ChatGPT runs on NVIDIA chips. In September, the two companies announced a strategic partnership. NVIDIA will invest up to $100 billion in OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT. They will build and operate databases. So you get the gist. NVIDIA works with Palantir. Palantir works with Microsoft. Microsoft owns a big slice of OpenAI. OpenAI runs on NVIDIA chips. And now NVIDIA is investing in OpenAI too. This is not a supply chain. This is a money loop. And there is big money involved. This is a circle of trillion-dollar giants. They're feeding each other, they're funding each other, and they're betting big on a future built by themselves. It raises a question. Is this innovation or inflation? And we're not saying that AI is not powerful. It is. It can write code, it can predict supply chains, it can design drugs, it can run factories, maybe even pilot fighter jets one day. But it cannot yet do the most important thing in business, which is to create real revenue outside the circle. Right now, a huge chunk of AI money comes from AI companies. They're buying from other AI companies who are building AI tools for AI companies. It's like selling shovels in a gold rush. They're all selling shovels to each other, hoping that someone eventually finds gold. As of today, investors do not seem to care because they see trillion-dollar dreams. They see charts that only go up. They see NVIDIA as 15% of the US economy, and they have FOMO, the fear of missing out. That's doing half the heavy lifting. But there is a twist. Carousels are exciting because they keep spinning and spinning. But at some point, they do stop. And that point is where the real test is. AI must prove it can sell to the outside world, not just to its own club of billion-dollar believers. Until then, we are watching the most expensive merry-go-round ever built and hoping it's not spinning towards a bubble. A mysterious airbase, a multi-decade deployment, and a silent withdrawal. This is not some story from the Cold War. This is the story of India's first overseas airbase. It is located in Central Asia, in the village of Aini in Tajikistan. And why are we talking about it tonight? Because, turns out, India vacated this airbase in 2022. Back then, there was no announcement or press release. India simply packed up and left. But this week, reports of India's withdrawal emerged. And today, the government has confirmed it.
We had a bilateral arrangement with Tajikistan for the rehabilitation and development of any aerodrome. This arrangement was in place for several years. After the conclusion of the agreement that we had with Tajikistan, we have handed over the facility to the Tajik side. This happened in 2022.
So what's the story of Aini? How did India get it? What did India do there? And why did India leave? First, let's tell you about the location. Aini is located just west of Dushanbe. It is home to the GMA, or the Gisar Military Aerodrome. At the start of the 21st century, this base was dilapidated. The Tajiks could not maintain or rebuild it. So around the year 2001, the Indian government had a brainwave. What if New Delhi took over this base? The idea found support in India's then Defence Minister, George Fernandes. Another key driver of this project was Ajit Doval. That's right, India's current national security advisor. He was a huge advocate for taking over this base in Tajikistan. So in 2002, India and Tajikistan signed a contract in the year 2002, and then the work began. The project was run by the Indian Air Force. The Border Roads Organization, or the BRO, was also roped in. Some 200 Indians began work at the Aini base. They built a 3,200 meter runway, basically long enough for even large aircraft to land. And who funded this? The Ministry of External Affairs. They poured some $100 million into Aini. By the year 2005, the work was complete. India had an operational base in Central Asia, which brings us to the second question. What did India do there? New Delhi never had permanent deployments. We had 2 or 3 military helicopters stationed there. Both those were gifts to Tajikistan. The Indian soldiers simply operated them. The current government also deployed some fighter jets in Aini, specifically the Sukhoi Su-30. Again, this was a brief deployment. It was never stationed on a permanent basis. For India, this base was all about strategic presence. Because look at where Tajikistan is. It shares a border with Afghanistan and China. It's also quite close to POK, that's Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. So from Aini, from this base, India could project power. It could also bypass Pakistan and access Afghanistan and Central Asia. And we saw this in August 2021. The Taliban had overrun the Afghan capital. Hundreds of Indian citizens and diplomats had to be evacuated, enter the Aini base. India's transport planes were deployed to this base. They waited for clearance in Tajikistan, and once the coast was clear, they flew into Kabul. So the base wasn't just about posturing, it actually came in handy. Which brings us to the final question. Why did India leave it? Because Tajikistan wanted us to leave. In 2021, they informed India that the lease would not be extended, meaning New Delhi would have to withdraw. No official reason is available in the public domain, but reports say China and Russia played a role. Both those countries are battling for influence in Central Asia. For Russia, the region is their backyard. It used to be part of the former Soviet Union. And for China, it's a bridge to West Asia and Europe. Beijing sees itself as the prominent power in Eurasia. Both Russia and China did not like the idea of non-regional troops at Aini, so they pressured Tajikistan to end the lease. The question is, what next? India has ambitious designs in Central Asia. Our hope is to access this region through the Chabahar port, which is a big-ticket project in southern Iran, Chabahar. But as this episode shows, it won't be easy. India will meet resistance in Central Asia. The key is to keep trying, keep offering better deals and better terms. Eventually, opportunities will open up. Our next story is about American visas. The US is changing the rules again, and this could impact thousands of Indian families. The US is ending automatic extensions of work permits. That means if your work authorization needs to be renewed, it won't happen automatically. You may struggle to keep your job. This new rule will impact 3 categories of visa holders. 1, spouses of H-1B visa holders. 2, workers on L-1 visas. And 3, dependent visas. Until today, there was a grace period of up to 540 days. This allowed people to keep working while their paperwork was being processed. But now that safety net is gone, and for many Indian households in the US, this rule change could mean a sudden loss of income. Here's a report.
A major deadline has just passed in the United States. As of today, October 30th, the US government has officially ended automatic extensions of work permits. And this change could hit Indian immigrants the hardest. If you or your spouse work in the US on a visa, this story affects you directly. Let's start with what changed. If you're a foreign worker in the US, you need an EAD, Employment Authorization Document, to legally work. It's like your work license, and it has an expiry date. Until now, if your permit was about to expire, you could still keep working, because the system gave you an automatic 540-day extension, while your renewal was processed. That protection is gone. Now, if your work permit runs out, you can't work, even if your renewal is still pending. That means delays in paperwork could cost people their jobs, not because they did anything wrong, but because the system is too slow. And here's why it matters for Indian families. Many Indian professionals in the US are on H-1B visas. Their spouses often rely on EADs to work. Now that second income is at risk. This change affects spouses of H-1B and L-1 visa holders, those on E-visas, refugees, and asylum seekers too. If you are in this group, you could be forced to stop working. For thousands of families, that means a sudden hit to household income. Mortgage payments, school fees, basic expenses, all could be affected. And for many, it's happening without any warning. So why did the US make this change? The government says it's about national security. The Immigration Office, USCIS, wants more time to vet each application before letting someone continue working. They're calling this a common-sense rule, and they've advised people to file renewals 180 days early. But that's not always realistic, because the system is already backlogged and many applications take months to clear. This change comes on top of other roadblocks. Just weeks ago, the US raised the H-1B visa fee to $100,000. This is for companies crossing a certain salary threshold. In Florida, the local government is pushing public universities to stop hiring H-1B holders in favor of American graduates. Across the board, the message is clear. The US is tightening the rules. So what now? If you're an immigrant worker or married to one, check your visa and EAD status today. This rule comes into effect on Friday. If your work permit has expired, check if you need a renewal. And apply quickly. There's no buffer anymore. No automatic extension. Only paperwork and a waiting game. For Indian families in the US, this change is a big setback. The loss of a second income can change an entire household's future. And for many, it's happening through no fault of their own. In a system that's already complex, today's deadline just made it harder. The visa hasn't changed, but the rules to survive on it have.
There's an old rule of world politics. If you dominate the seas, you can dominate the world. And it's easy to see why. We use the sea for trade, we use the sea for wars, and we use the sea for resources. So maritime power is key to global power. In the 21st century, that doesn't just mean a strong navy, that means a lot of other things too, like your shipbuilding capacity, your seafaring population, and your ability to handle trade. India is hoping to make it big in this industry. Yesterday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi attended the Maritime Week in Mumbai. It was attended by some 85 countries in total. All the big bosses of global shipping were there. And to all of them, Prime Minister Modi had one message. India can be a steady lighthouse in these choppy waters.
When the global seas are rough, the world looks for a steady lighthouse. और भारत ऐसे लाइट हाउस की भूमिका को बहुत मजबूती से निभा सकता है। ग्लोबल टेंशन्स, ट्रेड डिसरप्शंस और शिफ्टिंग सप्लाई चेन्स के बीच भारत स्ट्रेटेजिक ऑटोनॉमी, पीस और इंक्लूसिव ग्रोथ का प्रतीक है।
Prime Minister Modi unveiled initiatives worth 2.2 lakh crores, which is around 24 billion US dollars. These will cover both shipping and shipbuilding. It also includes the purchase of 437 vessels. And today, Prime Minister Modi doubled down on this message. He wrote a LinkedIn post on India's maritime progress. I'll quickly go through the numbers. First is total capacity. India has almost doubled from 2014 to 2025, from 1,400 to 2,700 million tons. Same with turnaround time. This is the time between a vessel's arrival and departure. It has fallen from 93 hours to 48 hours. The seafaring workforce has also boomed from 125,000 to 300,000 today. Today, India makes up 12% of the global seafaring workforce. So clearly, the sector is booming. The question is, what explains this rise? What is next and what is India's target? Well, this government has focused heavily on the maritime sector. It has scrapped colonial-era laws on shipping. It has also introduced a new law, or new laws rather, to attract investment. Plus, the public spending is up. This week, Prime Minister Modi announced 70,000 crores for the shipping industry. That's why the sector is growing fast. But the next step is arguably more difficult. India is eyeing next-generation ports and next-generation reforms. For example, the Viringyam port in Kerala. It is poised to be India's first deep-water hub. Another example is Vadhavan in Maharashtra. Again, this is a deep-water port, meaning large vessels can reach closer to the shore. Once completed, these ports will boost India's maritime traffic. Of course, the government cannot do all of this alone. You need private participation as well. Hence, Prime Minister Modi's appeal today. Let me quote from what he wrote. I can say with confidence that India offers the perfect harbour for investments. We have infrastructure, innovation and intent. Come aboard. And this is a global appeal because India allows 100% foreign investment in shipping, meaning a foreign company can own the entire project, 100%. They're not required to take a minority stake. But are these companies interested? Well, two giants have announced investments this week. That's Dubai's DB World. They're putting in $5 billion and Maersk is investing $2 billion. So foreign money is coming in, which brings us to the final question. What is India's target? What is the goal? The government has unveiled something called Maritime India Vision 2030. It has around 10 objectives in total. But the wider goal is this, to become a world-class maritime power, whether it's to handle cargo, to build ships, to build ports and supply chains, or to provide sailors. On paper, India has all the ingredients to make this work. We have some 11,000 kilometers of coastline. We have natural deep water ports. We have a young population capable of building ships, and we also have a history of seafaring. Think back to the Chola or Maratha Empire. So as a country, we have all the ingredients for maritime supremacy. It's about seizing the moment and cashing in. It reads like a Hollywood spy thriller. On one side was a decorated Venezuelan pilot. On the other was a US federal agent. The pitch was this. The agent wanted to bribe Nicolas Maduro's pilot. Maduro is the president of Venezuela. The American agent wanted to bribe his pilot. To do what? Divert the Venezuelan president's plane so that the Americans could capture him. Thus began a 16-month-long covert operation. It started in 2024, but the Venezuelan pilot ghosted the US agent. So the operation failed and Maduro is still in power in Venezuela. Our next report tells you more.
The pitch was simple. Divert the plane. Land somewhere friendly. We'll take care of the rest. You'll be rich beyond imagination. The target was a decorated Venezuelan Air Force officer and Nicolas Maduro's trusted pilot. The man who flew the most wanted president on earth into Moscow, Tehran, Havana, and back. The messenger was a former U.S. Army Ranger turned Homeland Security agent. And so began one of the most audacious operations in modern U.S.-Venezuela history. A rogue recruitment attempt that danced on the edge of geopolitics and Hollywood fantasy. To Washington, this pilot wasn't just a pilot. He was the Achilles heel. A man who knew every runway Maduro trusted, every emergency protocol, every decoy route, every midnight hop to a sympathetic capital. If you're trying to topple a leader you can't invade, indict, or intimidate. You flip the guy holding the joystick. That's the theory. So, they pursued him like no one else. Encrypted chats, whispered promises, the kind of careful, unglamorous spycraft that looks boring until suddenly it isn't. For 16 months, the agent worked him like a long con. At first, the pilot played along, just enough to leave doubt. A phone number here, a hint of curiosity there. Then came silence, then suspicion. America had misread the room. When persuasion failed, the U.S. side tried something else. Psychological warfare. A leaked photo here, a mocking tweet there. A digital whisper campaign designed to make Caracas ask, is the pilot ours, or is he theirs? For a few hours, Venezuela held its breath. The presidential jet took off, looped, and returned. Rumors exploded online. Has he been arrested? Is he being interrogated? Did the Americans break him? You could almost hear spy movie violins. Then came the dramatic reveal. The pilot reappeared days later on state TV, flanked by hardliners, raising his fist in perfect revolutionary posture. The message was delivered. Beneath the cloak and dagger theater lies a blunt truth. This wasn't just about one pilot. It was a window into a shadow conflict that's no longer subtle. U.S. President Donald Trump has been escalating tensions with Venezuela in the last few months. President Trump dialed foreign policy like a late-night talk show. Loud, unpredictable, ratings-driven. He has sent ships to the Caribbean. American military has struck so-called drug boats. The administration has authorized covert CIA action in the country. And the bounty on Maduro's head has been doubled to $50 million. So is Trump trying to dethrone Maduro? Let's put it this way. If regime change were a movie, the trailer is already playing out. With military posturing, economic chokeholds, and cyber and psychological operations. Meanwhile, Venezuela says U.S. is making up an eternal war.
And the people of the United States know it. They're making up a new eternal war. They promise that they will never enter a war, and they're making up a war that we will avoid. How? With the mobilization of the peoples of South America.
For now, the tensions are simmering. But in the end, no pilot was flipped, and there was no revolution unfolded at 30,000 feet. Just one more covert plot, grounded by reality. But the next chapter in this U.S.-Venezuela tensions is still taxiing down the runway.
Walk into an average Indian home at lunchtime and you will see this. A plate full of rice, some rotis or another source of carbs, a bowl of dal, some vegetables on the side and a few spoonfuls of curd. This is the average Indian lunch thali. Of course, there are many variations of it. They change with region. There are non-vegetarian options. But if there's one thing that remains constant, it is this. The carbohydrates. They rule every thali. Your rice, roti, idli, dosa, naan, kulcha, they are the center of every plate. A meal seems incomplete without them. And that is a problem. Says who? The ICMR, the Indian Council of Medical Research. They held a survey across India. The survey covered 121,000 adults, and here's what they found. 62% of daily calories for Indians come from carbs. What's worse? Most of these are refined sources, like white rice, maida-based wheat, and added sugars. Only 12% of calories come from protein. Do you know what's the global standard for protein? 20% or more. In India, it's just 12%. And the rest of the diet is made up of fats, in which saturated fats are disproportionately high. So to sum it up, the Indian diet is full of carbs and low on protein, and this is by design, because for most of our history, we were a farming nation. We ploughed fields, lifted sacks, walked for kilometers, so carbs were survival. Even today, India is a majorly farming nation. 45 to 55% of our workforce is engaged in agriculture. But a big number of Indians now do jobs that do not involve intensive labor. They work at desks, in cushioned offices. Yet their diet has not changed, and that has left our bodies confused. So the body stores the excess carbs and sugar that causes an insulin spike. It slows down metabolism, and over the years it leads to diseases like diabetes, obesity and high cholesterol. No wonder India is the world's diabetes capital. More than 100 million people are diabetic in our country. That's more than the entire population of Germany. And around 69 million people in India are obese. And here's the other problem. Some of you may think we don't consume such carbs. We consume whole wheat flour or millet. Unfortunately, that does not matter. Replacing rice with millet does not reduce the risk of diabetes or obesity, because even that hits the bloodstream fast. So this is not a rice versus roti versus ragi problem. This is a problem of too much of all cereal carbohydrates, a problem of not enough protein and fiber to balance them. 73% of Indians do not meet the recommended protein intake. Most of our protein comes from cereals, not even from real protein sources like soy, paneer, tofu, eggs and chicken. And the equation right now is stacked against us. South Asians have a genetic predisposition to store fat around the waist. Doctors call it the South Asian metabolic curse. Add modern sedentary life, urban stress, late eating, and an overload of carbs, and the result is metabolic overload. Indians develop diabetes 10 years earlier than Western populations. And that too, at a lower body weight. So what is the solution? Well, you don't have to stop eating rice or roti. A healthy diet should have carbs as well. For instance, Japan eats rice. But there's a difference. Japan's diet includes higher fish and soy protein. So think portion control, not prohibition. Here's what a balanced plate would look like. 50% vegetables, 25% rice, roti, idli or your source of carbs, 25% proteins, that can be your dal or any kind of pulse, eggs, dairy, fish, meat, whatever you prefer. The idea is not to ditch carbohydrates, the idea is to accommodate them for healthy living. Because a health revolution does not need a dramatic sacrifice. Sometimes it can start with one less scoop of rice. Now to Brazil, which is witnessing the deadliest police operation in its history. More than 130 people have been killed. The operation was launched against a violent gang, but it seems innocents have died as well. The raids happened in Rio de Janeiro. The target was one of Brazil's biggest criminal gangs, but the scale of violence has shocked the country. There's drone footage. It shows bodies lined up at the city's Medical Legal Institute. Officials say that they seized drugs and weapons, but critics say this was not a victory. This was a massacre. Apparently, Brazil's president, Lula da Silva, was not even informed about the raid. Now the country's Supreme Court has stepped in. The United Nations has condemned the killings, and families in Rio are still coming to terms with the horror. Here is a report.
This is the Medical Legal Institute in Rio de Janeiro. And these are the bodies of the victims who were killed. Some under white sheets, others still being identified. From above, the scale is clear. It began as a police operation, but it has now become the deadliest raid in Brazil's history. 132 people are dead. And now critics are asking, how did it go so wrong? This happened in Rio de Janeiro, in the city's low-income neighborhoods, known as favelas. The raid was planned for months. It was supposed to target one of Brazil's most powerful gangs,
the Commando Vermelho, or Red Command. They deal in drugs, weapons, and often resort to extortion. And they've been expanding into new areas. So, 2 days ago, around 2,500 police officers and soldiers moved in. They came on foot and in armored trucks. The plan was to push gang members into a forested area where special forces were waiting in ambush. Gunfire broke out. And what followed was chaos. By evening, dozens of bodies were found across two neighborhoods, Pena Complex and Alamao Complex. Some of the victims were gang members, but locals say many were civilians were caught in the crossfire. Families laid bodies out in the streets. Protesters gathered outside the state government offices, chanting, "Assassins." The governor of Rio called it, and it, quote, "a historic success." He says 118 weapons and more than a ton of drugs were seized.
In yesterday's battle, the police emerged victorious. I repeat, our 4 victims were the 4 police officers killed. The rest were criminals. It wasn't our intention to kill anyone. We wanted to arrest them all alive. But it was retaliation.
But human rights groups are calling it a massacre. Brazil's president, Lula da Silva, said he was horrified. He wasn't even informed about the operation beforehand. Now the country's Supreme Court has ordered Rio's governor to explain how it happened.
President Lula was shocked by the number of deaths in Rio de Janeiro. He was also surprised, to some extent, that an operation of this scale was launched without the federal government's knowledge or involvement.
This gang, Red Command, was born inside Brazil's prisons. Today, they control entire neighborhoods, including parts of the Amazon. But this raid has reopened old wounds. Brazil has a long history of violent police operations in favelas, but rarely are the death tolls this high. The last time anything similar to this happened was back in 2021, when a raid left 29 people dead. This time, it's more than 4 times worse. Schools were shut, universities canceled classes, shops pulled down shutters. And people in the favelas are asking, who's protecting us? The United Nations has condemned the violence. Brazil heads into elections next year. And national security is already one of the top issues. Nearly half the population believes violence has increased since Lula returned to power. The Brazilian government says it understands the need to fight violent gangs. But critics say raids like these may be creating more fear than security. The question now, was this justice or just another tragedy?
Tomorrow is Halloween. It's a festival that combines horror, costumes, and togetherness. I know it's a weird combination, but then again, it's a largely American festival. Every year, the themes and costumes keep evolving. Sometimes they reflect politics, sometimes technology, and sometimes social themes. But a festival like this is tailor-made for the internet. Costumes can go viral, pranks can be live streamed, and of course, an endless array of memes. Take a look. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Hurricane hunters get tossed by turbulence while entering the eye of Hurricane Melissa. Naples sends Maradona's statue on a city-wide tour for what would have been his 65th birthday. And a literal CAT scan as big cats undergo scans for mobility issues in the UK. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1961, the Soviet Union tested a hydrogen bomb called the Tsar Bomba. It was the most powerful nuclear weapon ever created and tested. The Soviet Union detonated it to project its strength during the Cold War. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Want the facts?
The latest developments?
News that gets straight to the point.
Well, we've got all three just for you. This is Firstpost Live, a brand new show, your window into what really matters.
Don't miss it.